Welcome. On behalf of the Sister Bay Historical Society, welcome to this program this evening. My name is Terry Wolf. I'm one of the many volunteers for this organization. Tonight is the first of our Sister Bay Stories series, and as many of you know, we've had this going now for a couple of years. Have had featured a number of families and businesses of Sister Bay. So tonight we start this season with Husby's. To help us with that story, we have a number of folks to do that. So I have to do a scan of the room because I didn't check. Kathy Girdman, are you here?
Yes, right over
there.
There
she is, okay. So we have had the good fortune to make connections with Kathy, who is a member of the Husby family. So Kathy's father, Elmer, right? Kathy's father, Elmer, was Emma's husband, Martin's brother. So, Kathy, got that? Emma's husband, Martin, was Kathy's uncle. Okay, so Kathy helped us out with photos and her daughter Becky and her sister Mary. So we're grateful for that. And then we've had contributions from any number of sources to put on something like this, to gather the history and put it on. So some of you know Susan Armour, who was a researcher here in Sister Bay and other places. And we drew on some of the work that she did. We drew on information from Miles's articles in the Pulse over the years. So anyway, a lot of good sources of information that we're grateful for. So we've got in the room tonight then a variety of other people who will help with the program, and Dick is going to introduce these folks here in just a minute. But we've got you. We've got you as patrons of Husby's, some of who may remember Black Cows, if you really go back a ways and remember Emma and that. And then of course we've got an MC tonight who is back by popular demand. Master storyteller and friend to all of us, Dick Burress. So one last note, I do want to thank the team who runs Husby's today. So John Sawyer, James Larson, Chad Kadako, Joe Radosevich, thank you for Husby's support, not just of this program, but Husby's has been a supporter of the Historical Society, a sponsor of Chris Kindle Market. Earlier this year, they put on a fundraising event to help with the monies for the repair of the Anderson House. So we are appreciative of the team at Husby's and their relationship and support for the Historical Society. So thank you, guys. So, with that, I want to introduce a man who says that everything you hear tonight is 100% mostly true. So, with that, Dick Burress.
Well, thank you very much, Terry. I will try to be truthful. I have to say, though, that I have never been in Husby's. I did date Emma for a short period of time. But we're going to start the night with a little photo history and the narrative of Emma's story, Emma herself. So here we go. You guys can swing around if you will. Emma Rose Letty Husby was born at Raleigh's Bay on May 29, 1884. She was the sixth of 10 children born to Frank and Josephine Teskey Letty, who immigrated to the U.S. in 1874 from Bohemia, which is now part of the Czech Republic. Emma grew up in a farm in Liberty Grove at the corner of Waters End Road and County Trunk ZZ. Emma's husband Martin was born just down the road from her in 1886, making him 2 years her junior. Martin's parents immigrated from Norway in 1882. Martin and Emma married in January of 1910 at Martin's parents' home. They settled on a farm on Kinsey Bay Road where they were often entertained with dances and card games. In addition to farming, Martin was a fisherman and also owned a cheese factory. Unfortunately, at this time, there wasn't much money in farming or in their other business endeavors, so in 1928, when a building at the corner of Maple and Highway 42 became available, they decided to buy it. The building wasn't a restaurant, which was their intended use, but Martin was a good carpenter and he felt he could remodel it. Emma was a very good cook. Tourism was actually growing in Sister Bay, and the locals needed a good place to eat. So a restaurant seemed like a good idea. So on June 28th, 1928, Emma placed her first ad for the new business in the local paper. When the business opened, it opened without electricity or running water. Water was carried in as needed, and all cooking was done on a wood stove. The first year, Emma kept the restaurant open until January. During the winter of '29, improvements were made to the restaurant and the upstairs was remodeled to include rooms for rent. In June of 1929, the restaurant reopened and stayed open. Of interest is that Martin and Emma never closed during the Depression, which was helpful to many people. They were generous in providing for those in need, and additional remodeling was done in 1930. In 1933, Prohibition ended, and those with a license were allowed to sell alcohol. Unknown to most was that several years before the end of Prohibition, Emma and Martin had purchased a dormant license held by the village, anticipating the end of Prohibition. One of the rules for selling liquor was that you couldn't sell it in a family diner. Understanding competition and wanting to be able to compete with Kepsel's Hall across the street, now known as the Sister Bay Bowl, Emma and Martin decided to divide the business into a family restaurant on one side and a bar on the other. To make the building legal, separate entrances were built. The effort produced results as Martin managed the bar and Emma maintained the restaurant. So it began, or continued. A restaurant started in 1928, 10 years after the end of World War I, smack dab in the middle of Prohibition, and 1 year before the start of the Great Depression, was now in its 5th year. 6 years later, folks would celebrate the official end of the Depression, but also more in the beginning of World War II. Through it all, Husby's and Cherryland Restaurant would provide food and libation to the hungry and thirsty. Somewhere around 1940, the name Cherryland Restaurant was dropped from the business name stayed on the business records, however, but it was simply named Husby's. 1946 was an exciting year. The war had just ended. People were buying property or fixing old businesses. Things were looking great. And then Martin died. After 36 years, Emma was alone. At that time, it would have been easy, and no one would have blamed the 62-year-old Emma for selling her successful business. Instead, she was reminded of her parents telling her, "Get up, girl, and do what needs to be done." So Emma continued running the business alone until her death in 1973 at the age of 89. Her final years were not easy as health issues put her in a wheelchair, which severely limited what she could do. And yes, she definitely got help from her family and friends, but without question, she remained a force in the business. Emma passed in 1973, and that could be the end of this story. But 51 years later, there is still a very successful bar and restaurant in Sister Bay named Husby's. Yes, the ownership has changed a few times, and yes, the clientele may not be as regular as they once were, but the heartbeat of the business is still heard. The feeling of entrepreneurship and the participation in the life and well-being of the community is still great. Emma lives, and the village of Sister Bay is better for it.
Those are the kind of mad hatters of Fall Fest who show up with pretty elaborate hat designs every year. Then there's just a few samples of the Fall Fest sweaters from over the years. That's my mom and dad on Halloween. I think my dad's here. Sorry, Dad. This is the Mullet Hunters, prime band of circa 2000 in Sister Bay. Kit Boots from Al there, Jeremy Pyle. That's Little Eddie of the Little Eddie Big Cup. One of the legendary bartenders Door County who we lost way too soon, but a fixture at Husby's for many years. And a friend of mine from growing up down the road in County T and Egg Harbor too. So. There's the Bloody Mary that we'll probably talk about at some point tonight, I'm sure. This is just a random picture that was at Husby's when I took over, that of somebody in Europe coming across some Husby sign. I have no idea any other context. That's the Rhythm Chicken, just playing on the corner because he wanted to piss off the guy at the Village View. There he is playing on the patio, which for the longest time was like pretty much the only outdoor seating in Sister Bay. So, and there he is behind the bar playing again. Rhythm Chicken is a versatile performer. That's if you want to see that hairy chest, that's Brandon. He still works at the Bayside today, so if you could just ask him to. Halloween costume, that's me in the background. We were the Chippendales that year. Halloween parties at Husby's were quite a thing back in the day. If anyone recognizes that, that would be the Happy Schnapps combo. Also a huge deal for a long time at Fall Fest. That would be me, a much younger version of me. Not as hairy as Brandon, but... These are all just random photos that I shared with Terry, by the way, and now I have no idea what's coming up next. I'm kind of scared. Just to look at what the current owners have done, like taking that corner, I think it's good perspective from everybody who has these very rose-colored visions of Sister Bay over the years, and you look at that, and then what they've done with it today, and the amazing improvements that have been made, both by the village and by the owners today, and then Yenny at Spot, and down the street at Analog. It's just amazing the improvements and things that people have done with things, while still adhering to the historical character of the village, which I think is really great. That's just Elkie making out with patrons. Sorry if that woman is in the room. That's Little Eddie again. There were several of him. That some people might recognize. Terry, Pick, and Rhonda. You're welcome, Brady. This is just a fall fest when you're just overrun by 6, 7, 8 deep at the bar and just slinging drinks. You have no idea who's ordering them. And that's Pick and Kim, who were a fixture at the daytime bar scene many years before we took over, and then every year that we had it. From 99 to 04, but they were there a long time before that. And watching those two banter in the mornings was the best thing that nobody else saw. Those two just giving each other crap at 10 a.m. Like, Kim fired up for the day, Pickle saying, just dreading that first customer that would walk in the door. So, there you go.
Miles, thank you very much. Appreciate it, I really do. That was Save My Biscuits. You would have heard a lot of untruths if I had narrated it. So a little bit about the rest of the night. What we've done is we've broken this into sections, and the three people at this table are going to talk for a little bit. John Ostrand first, and then David and Craig. They'll stand up and move to the right and circle around while these three people come in as previous owners or administrators of the of Husby's. And then finally we'll finish up with the crew from today. Beyond that, I have a whole host of questions for them that they can grab and answer, but I'm going to start now with Emma's relative who lived in Sister Bay. I think is not the only living relative in Sister Bay, but John Ostrand. There was a picture up here of your mother, I think, Ella, and your father. Did you see that one? Okay. We missed that one? Okay. Well, John obviously knows a lot about the restaurant as a relative of Emma. And John, I guess I'm just looking And when you talk, please hold the microphone up to your mouth or fairly close. Tell us about what you remember about those days, growing up in Sister Bay with Husbys.
Well, I would just come there every day after school, and that was my spot to go. And I actually, where the opening into the kitchen is right now, there was an opening there also. And then there was a little black and white TV, and I would sit on the couch and watch my cartoons or whatever. And Emma would be in the kitchen. Emma wasn't the most child-friendly person that I remember. But I remember her standing, baking the pies and stuff, but pretty much always remembered her in the wheelchair. And, you know, Mom was a waitress there, and my dad was the bartender, and the bar was in the small side, and the dining room was the dining room, and black cows, soda pop, ice cream. And Emma kept a good eye on that too. So.
Emma had a pretty good lunch business with locals.
Yeah, she did. Yeah.
Jakey Kananko in one of the articles talks about a 25-cent chicken dinner, which is, I think that's the same price they now have at the bowl, isn't it?
No, only on Sundays.
Another article talked about the wall of shame. Do you remember the wall of shame? Your sister actually mentioned it in an article I read. That Emma allowed people to charge drinks during the week, but if they hadn't paid up by the weekend, their name went up on the wall of shame, which was very humbling.
I think that's there now.
So now you go on, you don't pay that night.
Okay. You told me a memory about a day watching TV in there when JFK was shot.
Right, I was at home, and actually it was after he was shot, and I was sitting on the couch, and I was watching when Lee Harvey Oswald got shot. And then I jumped up and ran into the bar to tell my dad and whoever was in there, and they all came running into the dining room and watched it. That's just where I know I was at that time.
There are those events in our lives that we all know where we were at, and that's one of them. So, John, thank you very much. Appreciate it. We're glad you're going to hang around. When you do stand up to move around, and don't do it until the other guys are finished, just watch the cord on the floor, okay? So in 73, after Emma died, it took a while, and the license was purchased by Bob Burns. And in 76, I believe, if I have my timeline correct, in 75, the license, or the object of running the license was given to David Kananko. Correct, David?
That's correct.
Tell us how that happened. You want to grab the mic?
I kept forgetting this last time. It was really interesting. We were just talking about it tonight. A friend of ours, growing up, his name was Dennis Sequist, was running the what was it called? Clayton's down in Ellison Bay, and he had heard that the lease was going to come up for Husby's, and he so told me. I was 20 years old, and he told me that I should call Bob Burns and ask him if I could take the lease on. And I said, sure, Dennis, he's going to let me go in there. I was a bit of a wild child, and he kept on me and said, you need to get on the phone. And I did. I called Bob, and I asked him if he would consider leasing the business to me. And we talked about it for a little bit, and he said, well, let me talk to Phil Burns, his brother, and we'll get back to you in a few days. And he called me back and told me that I could take the lease on. So, 20 years old. It was interesting, let's just say.
David, I'm going to ask you to give the other mic to Craig and then to hold yours a little closer to your mouth again.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I had the business for those. At the third year, I was a little tired and decided that I had enough of it and let the lease up. And that's when Pickle and Terry took it over.
All right. And we'll get to that in a short bit, but I want to know now, guys, what time do you open in the afternoon? Right now?
11 in the morning.
11 in the morning. That was not when they opened. Craig, when did you go in if you were going to open?
I thought it was 9:30, but Dave informed me today it was actually 9 o'clock. So
Because there's a little shirt that says if you can't day drink in the morning, you can't day drink or something like that.
yeah, something like that. And, you know, by 9:15, we had plenty of patrons.
And David, can you talk a little bit about your patrons?
I can. There are a lot of good people. And in fact, Dick and I touched base a little bit on this, and I wanted to mention, I mean, we had the day crowd and then we had the night crowd. And the day crowd was, you know, it started at 9 o'clock in the morning. Barney Beard would usually be the first one coming in. And I would be letting the stools down. I mean, we only had 19 stools in there and 4 chairs and a pool table, and that was it. It wasn't this Husby's that these gentlemen are running now. And Barney would come in, and the first thing he would do is, he saw that I just mopped, and he would spit in the corner in front of the men's room there, and just to say, I'm here, Dave. It was, and all I did is laugh. I mean, it was pretty entertaining. But falling back to the people that, I mean, there were so many different people and tourists and everybody that came in, but what really hangs on with me was the early morning crowd and the day crowd, because we had all of these older gentlemen that would come in. Whoops, Dick.
You're okay.
And we'd play cribbage with them or play Schmear. It's a card game for those of you that don't understand or know the game. And we just had the best time with playing with those guys. And I mean, they all just were hardworking, good, solid people in the community. And I mean, they were a lot of fun. And but it seems like Craig and Dell and I really kind of must have hit that point in time where those older gentlemen, because Chad, I can't imagine that you have many farmers coming in at 9 o'clock in the morning now that
I mean, John doesn't get out of bed till 10 now. So.
Now that the feed mill's gone and they don't have to come through there anymore, but I just, I listed out some of the guys that were there, and I headed this up as having character and being characters, because they were really a lot of fun. And people like Specky Nelson, John and Barney Beard, Chet Everett and Wally City, Ralphie Will, Stormy Weatherford, Al Brandt, Leland Lagerquist, Dick's dad, Gentry Burress, Jackie Pluff, Ray Byers, Winky Larson, and of course Jake and Eddie Kadanko were there quite a bit as well. So it was a lot of fun, and we ended up coming away with a lot of lines and a lot of short, you know, to throw at people and so on. But the one that stuck out, or has stood out with me, and I still use it all the time, was a gentleman by the name of Stormy Weatherstrom, that when he would be playing Schmear there, and somebody else would take a hand, his response to that was, you know, the dumber they are, the luckier they are. I still use that a lot.
So, anyway, that's it.
Thanks. Well, Craig, can I ask you a question? Where did you learn your mixology? Did you have to make a lot of Manhattan meat martinis and things like that?
We made very little of that. It was pretty much shots and beers, and we actually got aggravated if somebody wanted a Manhattan or something, or old-fashioned that we had to actually work on. To expound a little bit on what Dave was saying, the day shifts at Husby's, I worked for David for the first year. And it was just a delight. I mean, these old farmers came in, and they loved Dave and me. He was 20, I was 21. They were all, I'm guessing, in their 60s, 70s. And we just had a ball. And, you know, just so you know, these aren't guys that came in at 9 and left at noon drunk. I mean, they would sip on a shot for hours, and it was camaraderie. I mean, they weren't there to get wasted. They were there to have fun. And I mean, it was a great year. I worked for him for 1 year. Dave would work nights, I'd work days, and we'd switch. I can't remember if it was daily or weekly. Weekly, okay. And it was just a ball. The nights got at times a little bit tedious, and you know, it was busier. But you know, it was a one-man show. You know, it was Dave one morning and me afternoon, and you know, it was great.
Thank you very much. I just want to, I've got one story to tell with David at the helm. And Jeff Benson is not here tonight, is he? I didn't see Jeff. But this involves his mother, Sally. And this was a date. David was bartending, and I was with Chuck Gully. We had a lunch at Al's, and we were driving around after. Chuck was a local cop from the South. He talked like this, you know, he did. And we got a call to Husby's for a stolen car. And we got up there, and Sally Benson, a very good hometown Baptist who had never set foot in Husby's, had pulled up to Bundes to get a spool of thread and run in and come back out. Her car was gone. And so she went into Husby's to find, or to look for it, look for help. And so they called Gully, and I went in with him, and you know, David was tending bar, and we were all a little dumbfounded. And then a local patron, Larry Dahlstrom, was sitting at the bar, and he said, well, you know, Ralph Will just left, and he has a car the same color as Sal. So we got Sally in the police car, and again, a first for her. And we went up to Ralph's and knocked on the door, and Ralph came out, and sure enough, that was not his car. And he was so, you know, Chuck just told him to go in the house and sleep and do not go to get his car until he, you know, he didn't have anything to drive anyway. But Sally got in the car to leave, and she got down to the end of the road, and she jumped out of the car like she was on fire. Well, all of those old guys, David, do you want to finish this? Do you know the story? All of those old guys left the bar with a half pint, and they would slide it under their seats for the remainder of the day. And that particular day, the half pint slid forward and hit Sally in the foot, and I'm sure she thought it was on fire. And she got out, and we had to retrieve the half pint, and then she was on her way. Guys, we are going to rotate this way, and I will tell you that, yes.
Can I tell two quick stories?
Yes, absolutely. Grab your microphone.
Dave and I have been talking about this, and just a couple of real short stories of a couple of things that happened during our tenure. One was, and I'm sure a lot of you guys would know this guy, Jimmy Kessel, local boy. Won't go through all the details, but anyway, it was late morning, and he was in the bar with his wife, and he decided to bring a loaded pistol into the bar, which is a really good idea. And they were horsing around, and anyway, he shot the gun into the woman's bathroom, high enough where nobody would get hurt, but still a really colossal stupid idea. Well, there was a lady sitting on the stool when this happened, and she came out just screaming and covered in plaster. Nobody, I don't think the police were ever called. I think David might have been disciplined by the owner, but that's kind of as far as it went. And the other quick story was during the day, we'd get the beer distributors that would come in. And it was kind of fun just talking to him. And one of the distributors, I can't remember who it was, but he brought in Ray Nitschke. And anybody who's a Packer fan knows what I'm talking about. And anyway, great guy. We talked for a couple hours, and he let us try on his Super Bowl ring. We could have used it as a bracelet. I'm not kidding you. It was that big. Anyway, that's all I got.
That's great, thank you. I think if I remember correctly, he was trying to shoot the hands off the lake-to-lake clock. The second hand. All right, guys, for a little while, I'm gonna dismiss you over to these three seats, and I'll bring these guys on board.
Yep.
So after Craig left, as David mentioned, Pick came on board, as everybody knew him. And after 2 years, Pick had not had enough fun, so he leased the operation by himself. So tonight we have Pick's wife of how many years, Terry, before?
40.
40 years before he tragically passed. Son Brady. And I guess we're going to start with tap, tap, tap.
So anyway, as David had mentioned, we opened the bar very early in the morning. Pickle still kept it. I didn't think it was 9. I want to say maybe closer to 10. But anyway, and the doors would open, and it was all old-timers and farmers and everybody with their shots and their beers, and not crazy. Everybody was good. And one local gentleman would come in, and he had his beer, and I was down at the other end of the bar, and pretty soon I hear, and I'm like, okay, is he tapping at me for a drink? So I ignored him. Finally, I turned around, I go, first off, the name is Terry, not tap, tap, tap. And he goes, okay, Terry, not. Could I have a beer? And I said, of course you can, you growly old fart. After that, we were best friends, and I was always Terry Knott, and he was always growly old fart until he passed away.
Terry, how about a great memory at Husby's? Another great memory. You know, what do you remember most about it?
Okay, Peter Diltz will remember this one. So, Dell's sister was also one of our bartenders. And during deer hunting one year, she decided that her and her boyfriend were going to get married. And it had to be 10 in the morning. And Peter Diltz you married them. The entire bar is full of drunken, blaze orange deer hunters. So we figured we had about 50 witnesses to that wedding. Yes, that was crazy. Right next to the pool table. And I had a nice fake rose for my bouquet to give to her, yes.
And one of the things that we're going to talk about tonight is the difference between Husby's then and Husby's now. And if you go to Husby's now on a Friday night, you will, without question, and this is not an exaggeration, see at least 3 bachelorette parties. It is the place to bring bachelorette parties. And they all come in with their little sashes, buy me a drink, I'm getting married, and they all dress up. Now that's a far piece from everybody sitting around in their blaze orange. You know. Stuff changes. Brady, what was it? How old were you when your father bought the lease? Or
well, when my parents took over the lease, I hadn't even been a thought for about 6 or 7 years. But some of my early memories, which my mom reminded me of, emptying out the cases of beer and setting up the empty cardboard boxes like a choo-choo train. And I would get, my sister and myself, we would be in that, and it was like, yeah, we were in a choo-choo train. Some other early memories, where in the dining room now, there used to be, over in the corner, a big booth area. And I remember birthday parties, always got to have birthday parties at Husby's growing up. And my dad, of course, this was a little bit older. He was bartending, and you know, he would make that slow stroll. He wasn't the most nimble bartender, but he got from A to B eventually. So he would come over and take our order, and then slowly kind of penguin walk back to the bar and put that order in. Some other, growing up, when my dad was in his heyday, of course I was not of legal drinking age yet, so when I was probably 12 or 13, I had, sports, after school sports, so I would get dropped off by the late bus. Not sure when the tradition of yelling late bus started, but I would always get dropped off because my dad would be working until 6 and then shift change. So first thing I would do, I would set my backpack down, go and help myself to a basket of popcorn when there used to be a popcorn maker. That was a long time ago now, and it was unceremoniously thrown off the back steps. At least that's what I had heard. While my dad was working, I needed something more than just popcorn to keep me occupied. So in the dining room, there used to be a pinball machine as well as a couple of arcade games. And I'm like, okay, I really enjoy these arcade games, but being 12 or 13, I hadn't worked a job yet, so I didn't have any money. So I would, I wouldn't say reluctantly, but a little kid, like I'd walk up to the bar and, hey Dad, can I get some quarters from you? And there were a couple things that he would say over the early years. One, what do I look like, a bank? And he would give me a handful of quarters, and that would keep me entertained until shift change and we were ready to go home. Another time I asked my dad for some quarters. I think he told me to get a job. And just one of many memories growing up, my dad bartending, and as Miles mentioned earlier, him and Kim, there was a lot of colorful words that I didn't understand at the time, but now that I'm older, I appreciate that. And the picture of Kim and my dad, noticed he had the hat had a Packer logo on it. Well, I think according to Mom, that was that a Halloween costume? Because my dad is a big Bears fan, and so to see document evidence, proof of my dad wearing Packer gear, that was one of the few pictures that you will see of my dad wearing Packer gear. So plenty of other great memories. Of course, he started slowing down a little bit, and eventually he left. But a lot of great memories. So many I could carry on. I got to see the Packers win Super Bowl 45. I met my wife there. It'll be 8 years in September. Every Fall Fest, I am welcomed back with open arms, and it's like old times. So, and I have a burger named after me there. It's the Brady Burger. That's a separate story. But just so many great memories at Husby's, and I'm just fortunate that I can walk in there and know that my family has been a part of the tradition over the years.
Thank you very much, Brady. Brady, I'm going to bring you back in just a minute. I'm not even sure of the year, Paul and Fran Burton wrote a very interesting article called Looking Back, Husby's Part 1 and Part 2. And it's where I got some of my information for tonight. And one of the descriptions was, someone described Pickle as, he doesn't look like your typical bartender, but he does have a bartender's quick, dry wit and always ready with a good one-liner. Terry, you told me a story today about opening up without any fruit. Could you pass that along?
Yeah. So when we had the bar, maybe the first year or two, we didn't have fruit or anything that we added to drinks. It was, we opened up a bottle of beer, you wanted a vodka and tonic, you got it, you wanted that, gin and tonic. And unfortunately, some man came in and sat down and just said, yeah, could I have a gin and tonic? And Dell said, yeah, okay, so gets it, sets it down. And the guy goes, well, could I get a lime? And Dell said, what do we look like, a fruit stand?
Also in that article, when Pickle was asked in the article, did any of your customers become obnoxious when they drank too much? And he responded, of course, most of them. Terry, favorite, all of the same things, you know, the card games that went on, the people that you knew that came daily. You were still in that same period that David and Craig and Pickle were in. You know, we were morphing a little bit toward more tourism. But do you have another favorite thought or story about that time?
Well, actually, when I hadn't known my husband, David had the bar when Del, I believe, came from Florida, right? And started working for you. And I had no idea who he was, and I lived right next door to Husby's, so it was just easy, just let's walk over. So my girlfriend and I walk over and sit at the bar, and you know, this grumpy guy comes down, throws beer coasters at us, and he's like, what do you want? And so my girlfriend and I are kind of scared, and I go, could I just have a Coke? And she ordered a Coke, and he comes down, puts the drinks down, walks away. I go, well, who's that jerk? And I married him 4 years later.
So after the Pickle and Terry reign, Oscar Johnson bought the bar. There's a little bit of question. It was somewhere around '89, something like that. And the story that Mary Jo tells, and she apologized for not being here tonight. She really did want to, and it was tough for her to get off, and so. But she asked me to tell a couple stories, and she said Oscar was sitting with Dick Dobner at the Bowl on Fall Festival weekend, and Husby's was closed. That was during the transition, or actually before it had started. But Dickie said, "Why is Husby's closed on the best weekend of the year?" And Oscar said, "I don't know, but I'm going to buy it." And so the following year, he had 2 white tables out there, and I'm trying to think of who they were, his 2 assistants. They both set up Bloody Marys, and that began the Bloody Mary run through Fall Festival. They also served gravy burgers that day. And, so it became Oscar's for a number of years. And she said, she wanted to talk a little bit, or have me talk about the remodeling of the business. That was Oscar's idea. They took the wall down and made the horseshoe bar, and there's a lot of history in that, a very interesting history. They brought Elkie back from the West Coast. Elkie's still there, and she talked about the wild days when Elkie in the morning would be wearing more lingerie than some model. And they also started apparently the dollars on the ceiling, and I'm not sure that all of this is correct, but that's what their memories, dollars on the ceiling. And it was just a very good time. I asked her what she was most happy about, and she said, "I'm happy that we didn't have phones that took pictures back then, because we would all be getting out at this time." And that's probably very true. So Oscar, still owning the bar, then passed the license and to run the place along to the Dan houses. And Miles is next up. Miles, what can you tell us about your time there?
That I'm allowed to say? Well, first of all, I want to mention something about Pickle. And I've got a great Pickle story. And when we took over in 1999, there were a lot of people, because we weren't from Chicago, but we were from very far away. This little town called Egg Harbor, way south of Sister Bay, that nobody had ever heard of. But there was, a lot of kind of bad blood when we took over, because people were like, who are these guys? And we don't know who the heck these Danhausens are coming in to take over Husby's. And I was 20 years old, like Dave. I couldn't drink there. He could actually drink. In his era, he could drink in his bar. I couldn't drink in my bar. I was a couple months shy, I was 21. And there were some old timers and the construction guys who gave us a really hard time. Some actually boycotted because we charged them for beer for the first time in their life. And but Pickle and Kim were like rocks for us to lean on. They were so great as employees to have there, and to like keep me, my brother Dan, and my business partner Mike Helen, keep our spirits up, keep us moving forward, and figuring it out. Taught us the business. I could get into the story of how we ended up there, but it was kind of by accident. And what Pickle, the morning shift with him and Kim Kim would be giving them crap. They'd be cleaning out ashtrays and throwing them on tables, because back then everybody smoked in the bar. We actually ended up buying 5 smoke eaters for Husby's just to try and make a dent in all the smoke in there. So they put an ashtray on each table. And anybody who's worked in the service industry knows, like, if you open at 11, the guy who shows up at 11:05 is a jerk, right? Like, especially at a bar, you're probably hungover. And so you kind of hate that first customer. You really hate it when that first customer walks in at 10:55. And Pickle was the king of ignoring that person until we were officially open. The person would walk in, there was no hi, there was no pleasantries, it was just like they weren't even there. Until 11 o'clock, and one day there was this particular customer who would do this, and this guy was like 84 at this time, and he'd come in and he'd tip Pickle a dime every time he worked. And probably that was probably appropriate for Pickle at that time, but he walks in, and I think it was, Pickle said, like, "How are you doing today?" And he goes, "Well, I'm still alive." And Pickle goes, "Well, that's too bad." And he didn't laugh after he said that. He didn't smirk. He just kept on tossing ashtrays on tables. So thought I'd share that. Pickle was a really great mentor of mine, and I was very fortunate to have him around in my time and maintain that friendship for many years afterwards, and get to know Terry and hear so many stories from their era. And like even tonight, I'm hearing more and more stories. It is a bottomless pit at Husby's. Where do you want me to go?
Well, you brought some things, just some pictures here, and any comments to any of those?
Well, there's 2 pictures there, and one just on the right, that's just an old pencil drawing that somebody dropped off that they had done of Husby's that I just thought was pretty cool. In the middle there is a guy by the name of Darren Donner, and I wrote an article once about learning what Husby's meant to Sister Bay, and when I really figured that out, and that it wasn't just about being a tavern, and that it wasn't just about getting drunk. It's just that, you know, some people have a church to go to. Somebody has some sort of community center. Some people have family. Some people have none of those things. And those people end up having a bar, right? So you end up being this center place for people in good times and bad. That's where they celebrate. That's where they cry. That's where they mourn. That's where they come together. That's where they break apart sometimes. And over the years that I had Husby's, I really saw that up close and personal, and I really valued the fact that Husby's isn't a 21-year-old bar. It's not an old-time farmer's bar. It's everybody's bar. And they all intermingle, all ages, you have to be able to talk to everybody if you're gonna be hanging out at Husby's, if you're gonna have a good time. Because if you can't talk to everybody, you might as well get the hell out, right? And that was crystallized for me in the spring, I think it was 2001. We had a bad run. People joke, locals will joke, like the spring is when sometimes you end up having a lot of people make it through the winter and then they pass away. And in that particular spring, we had some of those, but on top of that, we had Johnny Gonzalez, beloved local restaurateur, died at age 41. Jack Landstrom died that spring, was a regular of ours. Fred Alley died that spring, the founder of, I shouldn't say founder, but a huge force in American folklore theater, just out on a run. He was 38. And then Darren Dobner, who was working for us, and the story with Darren is, Darren left, I think when he was 16 or 18. He grew up in Sister Bay and left, and he was gay. And he didn't feel like he could be himself in this town. So he left for a long time. And in 2001, he shows up at the bar, and he is asking about having a job. And it's one of the things I regret most is just the thought process that I had at that time was, well, how is this bar? We're like the redneck bar in many ways. We are the construction workers bar. And how can we have this guy who's obviously flamboyantly gay working behind this bar? And I should never have thought that way. It's embarrassing to have thought that way. But luckily, my business partner, Mike Hellman at the time, was like, no, he's gonna be great. And I ended up working a ton of shifts with him. And at the time, we were kind of struggling to get over the hump. And he saved our business. He brought in so many more customers. Anybody in here from women's bowling from that era knows that they came in every night with there, and he brought a lot of women back into the bar. And over 9 months, just worked wonders for us. and became a really great friend of mine in a really short time. And when he died of a heart attack at 41, just a couple of weeks after we sat in the bar and cried about Johnny G dying. And we closed the bar that day, and free food, free drinks for everybody. And a couple weeks later, we're doing it again. And we didn't have all that free food and free drinks to give away, but it's what you do when people need it. And then Darren dies, and that was just crushing. But I remember going to that funeral, and the church on the top of the hill just packed, overflowing with his old friends from his party days in Seattle and Green Bay, people dressed in ways that people in Sister Bay had never seen before, coming into that church, and then the masons and the carpenters and guys with their hammers taking time off work to go to that church and say goodbye to Darren and honor him, and just that place being overflowing with people in this town, and him getting carried out of the church to Frank Sinatra's My Way, and just crying, but looking around and seeing all these people you never thought would be mourning that person together, crying and being touched by him and moved by it. And it told me a lot about what, doing the right thing and being good people and how someone can change a town. And he really did. And it's so gratifying now, 24 years later, to see the pride flags flying in this town. And to see what Husby's is. When Husby's first did a t-shirt, that was a rainbow t-shirt, the current owners, I just thought that was so important to me and to this community that we're so far beyond, well, we're not beyond it, but a lot of us are at least. And that somebody like Darren could now grow up in this town and not feel like he has to move away, that he can't be part of this community. And, that's just one of those, I know we tell a lot of funny stories, but there's real stories, there's personal stories in that place too. One more thing. When he was working for me, by the way, the reason I brought that picture is because he brought that in once. He goes, "We don't have an Employee of the Week program." Well, I'm the Employer of the Week, and he put it up on the wall. That's his high school graduation photo.
Miles, I want to thank you for that.
We had another period here in Sister Bay where
Not everyone was necessarily welcome into the bar, and our history includes the migrant camps and the migrant workers. And John was there when the migrants could come in the bar, but why don't you tell the story, John?
Well, when they got off work from picking cherries or whatever, they would come to Husby's or the Bowl, and they couldn't be in Husby's, but they could come into Husby's. My dad would order quarts of beer and muscatel wine, and they'd take their money, but then they had to go stand outside and drink. But they could always come in to get their booze. And some of the next morning, sometimes, some of the orchard owners would be pulling up, looking for someone that didn't show up, and they'd be laying out in the bushes behind Husby's. So as kids, we couldn't play out in the yard early after the weekend because they came to town to spend their money. And once they got picked up by their orchard owners, then we could go play.
I guess the story is change comes, but not necessarily quickly. But we do thank you, Lydia. So I think we're going to rotate the three of you out. Bring up the one. Okay.
So when I took over, here's the names that were kind of around the bar a lot: DJ, Jikes, Johnny G, Hammered, Stoner, Big Eddie, Little Eddie, Eddie the Eagle, Psycho, The Hun, Wiener Dog, Hawk, Juicer, Weasel, Two Beer, Butcher, Big Glenn, Pickle. And then you have to sign paychecks for the first time. And none of those names are on paychecks. I'm like, who the heck is Delmar? So that's when I got introduced to the endless array of incredibly clever and totally disconnected nicknames that we have up here. Like the story of Pickle. You tell this. Like, why is Pickle Pickle?
Okay, so as you know, his name was Delmar. So when he was little, and he'd be hanging out with all the little neighborhood kids, and one of the mothers said, "So what's your name?" And he goes, "Well, I'm Delmar, but you can call me Del." And she goes, "Well, how about if I call you Delly Delly Dilly? How about if I call you Dilly Pickle?" And that's how he got his name, was Delly Dilly Pickle. And he was Pickle until he passed away a year ago. Yes.
Thank you very much. So, current owners, and I guess I would like to start with John. As I read this, in 2009, John, you purchased the license and the property, and you picked a couple partners, and recently you've added one. So can you tell us that story?
Very interesting, because when it did start, we played over 30 basketball. It was Chad and I, and we'd go to play basketball, and we always stopped at the mill. So I played till I was 55. So that means every Wednesday night I was not home with Jackie, and I was at the mill having a few beers with Ricky Johnson, Paul Linden, Fuzzy Sundstrom, and all of us that played North. And we always sat around at the mill talking to Donnie Petersall, going, "Hey, you know, someday we should buy a bar." And Chad and I got talking, and we said, "Thank you." And we should maybe buy a bar, get 7 partners, and everybody gets to bartend one night a week. And so life went on, and then all of a sudden it came up for sale. And I told Chad, you know, maybe we want to do this, and we did. And James was our manager at that time, so when he was coming back, then he joined and then bought in 3 years later. That's how the story goes. And the interesting thing is we talked about community. You know, Husby's has been a part of my life since I started dating Jackie, worked for Carlson Erickson, played cards with Bino and Jackie Landstrom doing the highballs and getting my tie cut off. I was at a wedding at the Bowl. I came over, I'm playing Schmear with Bino and Dennis Berto. Bino goes, "Hey, you can't be wearing a tie playing Schmear." And he grabbed the scissors and cut my tie off. So I knew I was in right away. But probably one of the funnest things when we started, we had to create an LLC. And it was like, what do we call it? And as Chad and I talked and we discussed it, we called it Husby's EL. So what do you think the EL stands for? Emma Lives. So if you get paid from Husby's or get a check, it'll say Husby's EL on it. So a lot of fond memories, and I think it's our community that really makes the difference, you know, in that. And from me, just going talking about community, you know, Jackie and I would date there. You'd come back from college, all your college friends would meet there. It was a place to gather. And, you know, after Sister Bay baseball, I played there for 20 some years. We'd go to Husby's and we would have a great time. And, again, a few characters in that world. Rick Katursky played for Sister Bay many, many years. And I believe it was Pickle was bartending, and Paulie Becker was there, and Rick Katursky, they go, "Hey, let's do a sliding no-handers," which I still perform today, by the way. And so they put the shots on the bar, and you put it in your mouth with no hands. You went out the back door, opened the screen door, and somebody held it, and you'd run into the bar and slide and then drink the shot, and everybody piled up by the door. So I've had a few good memories. But as far as, you know, the Husby's and buying in, and James came in 3 years later, we understood that the business was growing so fast, and we needed somebody to be there, because I didn't want to be there at 2 in the morning.
Or at 10 in the morning.
Or 10 in the morning. But just going back, I do have one thing to share since Mary Jo wasn't here. As you know, I was part owner of Carlson Erickson with Don Erickson and John Carlson for 25 years. They retired earlier, but actually in 1991, the upstairs at Husby's burnt. So there was a fire in the boarding rooms up above, And Oscar Johnson in '91 called Don Erickson and myself. We went down there and we actually tore off the whole second level, all the rooms. So I'll pass these pictures around. This is '91. And so if you envision when you go into Husby's, there's the circular roof. That roof was actually built below the second floor. So when we tore off the whole second level of the building, we left the floorboards all there and we just put all new trusses and roof trusses and a new facade on it. So nobody really knew a whole lot about that because it only took 3 weeks for us to do it. So I'll pass these around. So that's something you or Joe would have talked. And then that's probably where I learned what cash was. Because Oscar Johnson, and he's not here, you kind of goes, hey, I got a bag of cash from Oscar. You want to split it? So.
Could I have that photo? While we're doing that, David had a memory also. When he moved in, the washer and dryer were in the basement and he wanted to move them upstairs for him and his wife to do laundry. And so he started tearing into the upstairs. And I'll let you finish the story because you had a find as well.
And that was that there was an old cistern up there. I mean, Dick had mentioned that they didn't have running water for quite a time when they started opening Husby's. And so they had a cistern upstairs there. And it covered the entire room, covered all of the stud spacings and everything else. And so when I went to pull out the cistern out of there, and I started cutting the steel that was in there, the gauge steel that's there, and I started pulling things away, every stud space there in that 10 by 10 room was full of empty half-pint bottles. And so somebody, the liquor storage door was just like right next to the cistern. So somebody, and I've got ideas, but I'll keep them to myself. Somebody had gone in there for a lot of years to fill those up. It was pretty fun.
Would you pass that mic down to Joe? Joe, we heard about how these guys came in, and then you joined the group. You had to sell your firstborn to come in. Is that what?
Yes.
How did that work? Why don't you tell us about your entry into the business?
So I had originally been managing a bar in downtown Chicago a little over 8 years ago, and my girlfriend at the time, which many of you might know, is Samantha Eckhart, Charlie Eckhart's daughter from Gibraltar, which she's now retired as of this year. We were dating down there, and we were trying to find a place to move, and we wanted to move out of the city. So we were, I'm originally from Minnesota, and
But he's a Packer fan.
I've been a Packer fan since I lived in Minnesota, which I feel like I've taken enough crap from all my Minnesota nights from that for many years, but I'm very much a Packer fan. We were just trying to find a place to move out of the city, and we had just randomly traveled up to Door County for a weekend, and I was actually sitting at Husby's. Our bartender at the time was Josh Stone, and we were sitting there, and it was happy hour, and I would just leaned over to her. I'm like, why don't we just move here? And she's like, really? I'm like, yeah, this seems great. Why are we looking? And she's like, well, are you sure? I'm like, well, I don't want, if you don't want to move back home, I understand that. She's like, no, I'd love to move back home. And I'm like, do you think I could get a job? And she had worked for Husby's many years, a long time. She worked with James's wife, Kayla, long before I was even around in Door County. And she's like, yeah, these guys would hire you in an instant. And I ended up sitting down with James and his wife, Kayla, who were managing at the time, and got a job bartending. That was 8 years ago, and the rest is history. I moved up and started managing, and when they asked me to manage, I said, I managed in Chicago before, and if I ever manage something again, I'd love to have a piece of the pie for it to really make it worth it for me. And these three gave me a great opportunity to buy in, and I'm very lucky to be sitting here.
Well, welcome.
I
I'd just like to mention that the late John Bastian on Joe's first day of work, Joe walked in and he had a mohawk, fancy haircut, and JB goes, "What the hell is this? Turn it into a city bar. City haircuts." You know, like he was just so upset. And you know, but if you knew JB, it didn't take him long to, you know, love Joe just like the rest of us did. So that was a good one.
That's great. So one of the things that we've heard over and over and over again, and I John, if you could hand that microphone here, and I'm going to pass it back to Terry, because I think Terry can definitively give you the story on this. Is Husby's haunted?
Yes. Yes, it is. When I started working at Husby's, when Pickle took it over, I lived upstairs, and it was a very old, like, rooms, and then a little living room and everything. Well, anyway, so I lived up there, and I had a dog, and I would close the bar at night, we had a lot of pinball machines. I'd turn that off. I'd go in the back and I'd get beer and, you know, everything to stock. I'd come back in the bar. All the pinball games were turned back on. So I'm like, okay, and where's my dog? Well, I didn't see my dog. Well, anyway, so we go upstairs to bed after I turn the machines off again. And we're up in my bedroom, have the TV on, and the dog every night would jump off the bed, go to the door, because we would hear creaking and rolling down the hallway, and the dog would jump off my bed and growl and bark at the door every night. Never saw anything, and if it was Emma, we knew she was a nice lady, so we wouldn't get hurt. But I believe that was her rolling down the hallway.
So I don't know if Husby's is haunted, but I do know that oftentimes personalities pass from generation to generation. And I just wanted to read this description of Emma in one of the articles. Emma was said to be both opinionated and very liberal and spoke her mind, but she was a generous person. Does that describe anybody at Husby's as managing partner now? Let's see. Opinionated, very liberal.
I mean, that could be either one of us. Very generic statement.
Why don't you tell us your favorite story at Husby's? So why it's good for you?
It's favorite story. I was thinking about that. I don't know if I have an exact favorite story, but one of them, most of them revolve around my kid, or JB, or James and JB stories. But when Grace was about 3 or 4, I would have her walk behind the bar. She always wanted to play the pool machine, and she needed to get quarters. So she knew where the button was to open up the register. She could put the dollar in, and this is all below her eyes, or above her eyes, grab the 4 quarters, and then walk back from behind the bar, and she'd be back there by herself. And the customers would just look, like, what is she doing? It was one of my favorite joys. And then the first year she entered the NCAA basketball pool with the Mink River and Husby's, and it came down to her and JB. If North Carolina wins, Grace wins. If Gonzaga wins, JB wins. And JB was giving her the business and just talking so much smack to a 7 or 8 year old. But he was so happy when Grace won. But he would always give her the business about beating him in the NCAA pool. And then she asked me, "Have you ever won that, Dad?" I'm like, "No, I've never won that." So I don't know.
That's great.
That's what I got.
I wanted to mention that when we started talking about this progression of ownership, there are certain things Emma and David and Craig, even Pickle, didn't have or had to deal with that you guys don't have to deal with today. You know, one of them, if anybody's bartended in previous decades, you know, the grossest part of the evening was picking out the cigarette butts out of the urinals and cleaning out the cigarette ashtrays all over. You know, people would throw them in the urinals thinking that nobody has to take these out. But there are things that you guys have to deal with that they never had to deal with. And one is definitely TripAdvisor. You know, the Chamber of Commerce would have classes. They would have classes and they would tell you, if you get a positive If you get a positive message, be good and be grateful. And if you get a negative, remember that you're representing both your business and your business. So please be patient with these people. They're just trying to have fun. And so, James took charge of responding to the TripAdvisor messages, and he actually would finish his work at night, and then he'd sit down often with a cocktail and read to find out if there was anything that he should respond to. And one day, this message came up.
August 2018. Reviewer Kristen H. gives an average review. It says, titled, "If you like bar food." This place was packed. They had a band, which was nice to listen to. The menu was bar food and pretty expensive for a hamburger. We ended up just getting a beer and listening to the band for a while and headed someplace else to get some more unique eats.
Okay.
So you remember that on the movie Ghost, when Oda Mae would get possessed by spirits and then, talk differently. And that particular night, Emma entered James's body and said this, and James then typed this.
So, if you like bar food, you should eat food at a bar. If you don't like bar food, you should keep your ridiculous reviews to yourself. I once went to a Chinese restaurant. Guess what kind of food they were serving? I'd be curious to ask where you went for your unique eats. If $9 for a burger and fries was too expensive. Sorry that our menu was so boring and full of bar food. We are a bar. Glad you liked our band. I bet they sounded like a typical bar band. We're also appear to be our typical bar crowd. Was the bartender friendly at least? Too bad you didn't stay until bar time.
So before we let James respond to that, I got to tell you that our good friend Fred Anderson went out to Las Vegas to I'll get this to turn off in a second. He went to Vegas to a convention out there, and they had the same type of do's and do nots. This is how you respond to this particular. And so they thank you. So the first do not they showed on the stage was James's response to that.
At some point, I actually have a journalism degree from the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. My mother was an English teacher for 35 years at Sebastopol High School. I just couldn't take the stupid people anymore. And a lot of it was just, if you read back on a lot of those reviews, there was just a lot of picking people's punctuation and grammatical errors apart. But, the amount of positive feedback I got from other restaurants up here, from my own staff that I was a lot of the time defending, made me keep doing it, even though John and Jackie try to talk me out of it all the time. But I've stopped doing it because I just felt like it started to attract more negative. People were just pinning for me at this point, trying to get a response. So.
And full disclosure, that voice that you heard in the first clip sounded an awful like the previous owner of Husby's, Miles Danhausen, and it was not his complaint, I need to say. Miles had James on the Door County podcast. And by the way, if you have not listened to Door County podcasts, they're wonderful. I would subscribe. They have really interesting content. And on that particular day, it was just a great afternoon between the two of them. John?
Just a couple things. There was comments made about the late bus, so I'll let James talk about the late bus. But the dollars on the ceiling, when Chad and I first bought it, we had a lot of planning, trying to figure out what to do and how to be part of the community. And we came up with the idea that let's give it to charity. So since we've owned it, all the money on the ceiling goes to charity. And I'm thinking somewhere around $70,000 has gone to charity from our ceiling. And I'll let if you heard the response from James, if everyone else gets up there, it costs you $1 to find out. But You know, we do have a poster, and Jackie's updating it now, and, you know, we did Shop for the Cops. Clark Erickson passed away. We helped bring his daughter home from the Netherlands, New Zealand. You know, we just been doing a lot of good things with it. So if you want to throw the dollars up there, it goes to great causes, so that's kind of thing. But you may want to talk about the late bus with JB.
Sure. I'll also add that I do believe the first large donation of ceiling money was Katrina. Am I correct? Maybe during.
Actually, Natalie Beck.
Okay, yeah. So it had started before. I just wanted to give them their props for that. So the late bus story is just that the happy hour patrons, or as JB called it, the hour of power. When the last bus was coming down the hill, that typically had kids on it that sometimes would get dropped off. Apparently this was more in the old days where all the kids get dropped off there and go find their dad and hang out underneath his bar stool for a while. But whoever would spot the bus first coming down the hill, any bar patron could yell out, "Late bus!" And that meant that we got you a free shot. It became quite a tradition. There's a couple of winners here in this room. When JB passed it, we passed it with him.
So just to add to this story, so Jackie, my wife, not a big drinker, but she wanted to go there and beat JB. So we sat right by the door, and she was bound and determined to go late bus first. Sure as hell she did. JB was so upset. Nice job, Jackie.
All right, well, it's almost 8:30. We've been here for an hour and a half, and I would like to see if there's any burning questions out there to anyone here. Belgie.
In lightness, Dick, of the one time you walked into the bar, all by your lonesome, there were two people in the bar. One was the bartender, and one was...
Well, yeah, that was under Terry, a pickle. I came into town one night, and I walked in, and the bartender, we'll leave him alone for a minute, he was asleep at the other side of the bar, and there was a brand new bartender behind the bar. And I said, "Hey, I'll have a tap," and he didn't say anything. He just kind of walked around, and then he walked in the bathroom, and at that point, Gary, I wasn't supposed to say it. The bartender woke up and said, "Hey, Dick, you want something?" And I said, "Oh, I got something from the other bartender coming." And he said, "Yeah, other bartender, right." So he walked around, and the till was open, and he goes, "I've been robbed!" And all of the change, everything at the bar was gone, including the till, and the guy was still in the bathroom. So he came out of the bathroom, and he headed out that door, and just then his girlfriend walked in the other door. She was tired of waiting for him. So I ordered her to sit down, and I went down to the end of the bar by the phone, and I dialed a 7-digit number for Sturgeon Bay and said, Husby's is being robbed. And they said, "Okay, well, the nearest officer is in Brussels." And the guy had walked back in and was walking toward me, and he reached over and hung up the phone while I was saying, "Okay," and then so I thought, well, I'm gonna die. And so I quickly explained to him that he hung up on the sheriff's department, and at this time there were squads converging from all 4 directions, and that he needed to let me call them back and just slow them down. So the next dial, Lyle Lundquist, our local constable, said, "You've got to get here right away," because so Lyle came down with his Roadrunner and his cowboy hat and the rest of the guy. Are there any other? If not, it's been, these guys will be around for a while, and it's just fun. I wish we had an hour and a half with each of them, but I really, before I get, there's a couple things. I want to thank the Historical Society, Terry in particular, for this wonderful effort, and these things are really fun. I want to thank the entire staff. I want to thank my wife, Jane, for celebrating our 45th anniversary here. She said, "Gosh, we'd like to do that together." And finally, I'd like to thank the 6 presenters, or the 6 groups of presenters tonight. We talked about the pulse of Husby's, the giving that goes on and has gone on forever. We didn't talk about the importance of Fall Festival, we didn't get to that, but it's extremely important to this particular corner as it is to all of the profits and non-for-profits. But it allows them to keep going through the winter and allows them to continue their efforts to give. So we'd very much like to thank all of you tonight for coming and all of you for being caregivers of Husby's. We thank you very much and good night.